Welcome back to the Suncoast Magazine. Doug Miles with you today. Great pleasure to welcome a man I've admired his work. Even though I grew up on the East Coast, I had a chance to see some of his work on cable, and I had a chance to actually work with this man a few years ago. I'll tell you about that in a little bit. Bob Miller, NHL Hall of Famer and one of the great play-by-play announcers for the L.A. Kings, has written a new book. It's called Tales from the Los Angeles Kings, and he joined us by telephone right now. And Bob, how are you?
Very good, Doug. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, yeah. Just to kind of fill in the audience a little bit, about, I guess, 15 years ago now, I had a chance to attend the Broadcasters, or actually Sportscasters Camp of America, which you were one of the co-founders with, and it was a great pleasure to meet you then, and it really helped me out a lot, and that was one of the great things that you and Roy Engelbrecht put together out there in L.A.
Well, thank you. We had a lot of fun. Roy is still running that every year. I'm not as involved as I was when you were there, but we're very pleased that it's not a fantasy camp as such. It could be if somebody wanted to do it that way, but for people like you and other guys who came there and now are working in the business, and that makes us very pleased and very proud.
It really was a lot of fun, and he actually got to do the actual play-by-play. I think we did Summer Pro League basketball, NBA. We got to do a baseball game.
Right.
I went twice. I think the one year we did it, the baseball game in Atlanta, Fulton County Stadium. So it was a great opportunity, not only to do that, but to meet men like yourself. And Chick Hearn was there at the L.A. camp when I was out there, so that was great. But and a guy that you talk about a lot in your book.
Well, the only way to do it is to, if you want to do play-by-play, you've got to do it. You can't read a book about how to do it, or I can't tell you how to do it. You've got to come out to that sportscasters camp or go somewhere, as you know, and actually do a game, and then do another game, and get better and better as you go along. And that was the opportunity of the sportscaster camp to do the NBA Summer League, and we went out to Anaheim Stadium, did an Angels game, and as you say, we went to Atlanta one year and did some baseball, and then some other sports on the big screen because they weren't in season, basketball and hockey. So we've got some guys all around the country that are working full time.
It was a great thing, and of course you started out doing some college sports, right? When you went to was Iowa, wasn't it?
Yes, had a chance at the University of Iowa to work for the campus radio station WSUI, and the nice thing about that was that they allowed students to go on the air and do most of the air work. And of course, we all made mistakes, but we weren't afraid that we were going to get fired, and had a chance to go on the air every day. And I tell people, if you're looking to do this and you're looking for a school, find a school in communications that has an on-the-air campus radio station, especially because rather than just TV, you're going to get more exposure on radio to get started, and get on the air every day and be able to make mistakes but learn from that. So I had a very good opportunity at the University of Iowa.
And then you moved on to, was it Wisconsin, where you did some football and hockey at that time, right?
Yeah, I got a job, went to work in Milwaukee first, and I wasn't doing sports, and then a sports director's job opened up in Madison, Wisconsin, so I went over there, and eventually was working for WKOW radio and TV, so I had a chance to do a twice daily television sports show plus play-by-play of Wisconsin football and basketball. And one Tuesday, the program director saw me in the hallway, and he said, "Oh, by the way, we're broadcasting Wisconsin hockey this Friday and Saturday night, and you're doing the play-by-play." And I had never done a hockey broadcast in my life, but Bob Johnson, who later won a Stanley Cup in Pittsburgh and was a great coach in Calgary in the NHL, and he was the coach there, and he was real enthusiastic, and he told me what I was supposed to look for. And the minute I did the first hockey game, the minute they dropped the puck, I realized it was the biggest play-by-play challenge that I had had in my career. And I really, really enjoyed trying to keep up with the pace of the game, and yet, as I tell young announcers, you have to do it at a pace where the radio audience can listen to the game and follow it.
Hockey is a game, unlike baseball and even football, where you can give most of the play. Hockey, you really have to paint quick sketches, don't you? You can't give every pass or every player movement.
Yeah, and that's, again, the thing that we stress in talking with young announcers. You don't have to describe every single play that goes on. Because with the speed of the game, you'd be trying all night long just to catch up with it, and I don't think the listener could follow it. So you learn to pick and choose what's important, and I think also, Doug, to take a breath and let the audience breathe a little bit. Let the sounds of the arena come in on radio, and let the listener feel like he's right in the arena or in the stadium. And you don't have to talk nonstop. Everybody just take a little breather once in a while.
Yeah, Vince Scully, I heard him talk about that, particularly with baseball. Let the crowd come in. And you even talked about that at the camp we went to. Let the crowd come in after an exciting play, and that really fills in the gaps, and you don't have to talk over that.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, like I say, I think that allows the listener to feel like he's right in the stadium. He's getting the atmosphere of what's going on in the arena.
You tell a great story in the book how you got the job with the L.A. Kings, and you've been with them since 1973, and some wonderful stories about a real mercurial guy named Jack Kent Cooke. Can you tell a story, too, about him?
Well, he was the owner of the team when I got here, and he didn't pick me the first year. Chick Hearn was in charge of finding a hockey announcer, and he recommended me in 1972, but I think Jack Kent Cooke, just to show everybody that he's still the boss, picked somebody else. And then they weren't satisfied with that, and Chick recommended me again, and that time Jack Kent Cooke, fortunately for me, listened to him and hired me. But I tell people that I worked for Jack Kent Cooke for 6 years, and the only reason I lasted that long, and I truly believe this, is he was out of town for 4 of those years because he was a hands-on owner, and there's no doubt about it. He would call us right during the play-by-play on the phone in the arena and chew us out because we weren't doing what he told us to do. And one story is that he considered the broadcast an advertisement for the Forum and all the events going on there. And he wanted us to push Kings season ticket sales. And if we didn't do it, he would call us on the phone, "You're not talking enough about season tickets." So in the book, I point out there was a scientist named Pavlov who wanted a conditioned response. And to get that from his dog, he would ring a bell and feed the dog. And every time the dog heard the bell ring, it would salivate, thinking, "I'm going to get fed." Well, every time I heard a phone ring anywhere in the press box, it could be 5 rows behind me, I would immediately say, "Don't forget, King season tickets are available." I was Pavlov's dog.
Would you say he would be on the same level as Steinbrenner, if you believe all the stories about Steinbrenner calling the dugout in his heyday? That type of owner, huh?
Yeah, I think so. He was the type of owner that when you were winning, he would really get on you. When you were losing, he would kind of leave you alone. And I'm talking more about a coach. He would encourage you. But when you were winning, all of a sudden he would really be on you. And I think it was to say, "Don't get too big for your britches here," and he would knock you down a peg or two. And so he was involved, and rightfully so. He owned the team, involved in everything. But he was someone that people actually feared working for. And we'd have a lookout every morning who would come running down the hall like Paul Revere. "Mr. Cooke is coming, yeah. Mr. Cooke is coming." And secretaries would pretend they're on the phone. Office doors would close because if he saw you, he'd think of something he was mad about. And then they'd announce over the whole PA system in the Forum, "Bob Miller, report to Mr. Cooke's office," and everybody'd be pointing at you like, "Oh, you're in trouble now." So it was pretty bizarre, and I talk about that quite extensively in the book.
Bob Miller's Tales from the Los Angeles Kings is the name of the book. We're talking with NHL Hall of Fame announcer Bob Miller, and you talk about some of the owners you've worked for. You went from Jack Kent Cooke to another colorful character in Dr. Jerry Buss, and then Bruce McNall. So you have quite an array of people that you've had to work with out there.
Yes, we have, and going from Jack Kent Cooke to Jerry Buss was like going from one end of the spectrum to another, because Jerry Buss, he let you do your job. If he hired you, he was hands off. He very seldom said anything about the job you were doing, and sometimes I even wondered, is he ever listening or watching the broadcast or the telecast? But and then Bruce McNall was almost like your best friend, and it was never the employee-employer relationship with him. You could sit down and laugh with him and talk with him, and he loved to have me tell him stories about Jack Kent Cooke, and so it was a really good relationship with Bruce. And of course, Bruce McNall was the one who brought Wayne Gretzky to Los Angeles, and we talk about that in the book and how I found out about it and what the reaction was like. And so those were the glory days of Kings hockey in Los Angeles.
Great story about how they introduced Wayne to the media. that day. I guess they were, and then also another great story about how they introduced. You were part of with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar too, right? Introducing him to the media.
Yeah, I was in on that meeting when Jack Kent Cooke decided he was going to get Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and I wanted he quizzed everybody in there about a press conference, and somebody didn't give the right answer, and so he said, "Bob, what do you think?" And I gave a different answer, and he looked at the other person and said, "What am I paying you for?" And, it was really, and I go into detail of that story, and I think, Doug, not only that, but there are some stories in the book about an interview I did with Vince Lombardi, and in those days we were shooting film, and the film turned out all blank after about 45 minutes of an interview with Lombardi, and I had to go back in and tell him that, and I thought he'll just explode because he had no room for anybody making errors, and so I recount in there what happened and how he handled the interview, and then the most memorable interview I think I've had in my career, and I've been in this business for 46 years, was with the great Olympic track star Jesse Owens.
Sure.
And I recount a little bit of that in the book about how we talked about Hitler not shaking his hand and why his records were all of a sudden being broken, and he gave me an amazing answer, the reason why that was happening.
Yeah, great stories of people outside of hockey that you've had a chance to interview. And just kind of getting back to the great Kings players, you had Marcel Dion in that team. In addition, you say Gretzky and some of the great players like Rogie Vachon, the goalie. I've noticed, and we cover a lot of the Lightning down here, hockey players in general, and even when I was up in New York, I've noticed this, much better to deal with as far as media goes. They seem to be more mature when they come into the league and not as spoiled. Have you found that?
Yes, and everybody I've talked to that's traveled and covered other sports say that the hockey players are the absolute best when it comes to dealing with the media. And I think it comes, and I think you hit on it, they don't come into the league having been spoiled throughout high school and college with people doing things for them and falling all over them, and they come in with a pretty good level background of being raised in a lot of small towns, and they're very polite. They deal with people, and I think that's an image that surprises a lot of people. I mean, this is a rough, tough, physical sport, but even the historic tough guys in the sport, Dave the Hammer Schultz and other guys who would get into some fights on the ice, were the most polite and quiet people off the ice that you would ever meet, and they are a pleasure to deal with.
Yeah, I'm up at most of the Lightning games, just covering them in the locker room afterward. Always, even if they lose, they're stand-up guys, and they'll tell you what happened. And very rarely, I've never really seen it in person, where you see a player just say, "I don't want to talk to you." So they are much better.
It doesn't happen very often. And you read about a lot of other sports where if a guy has a bad game, he sneaks out the back door, or he hides in the training room until the media leaves. And it isn't that way with hockey.
Bob Miller joining us. The name of the book is Tales from the Los Angeles Kings. It's published by Sports Publishing LLC, and you can go to their website, sportspublishingllc.com, for more information on the book. Just a couple more minutes, Bob, and talk about some of the great games. You have many stories in the book about that, but I guess the biggest thrill was actually getting to do some Stanley Cup Finals with the Kings involved, right?
Yeah, no doubt about that. 1993, the Kings went to the Stanley Cup Finals, and I even tell a story in there about going to Montreal, where we started the finals, and going to the hotel to get my press credentials, and in the elevator coming down, a woman in the elevator said to me, "Excuse me, but can you tell me what is the Stanley Cup?" And I said, I was looking for Alan Funt, because I thought, I'm on candid camera. Nobody asked that question in Montreal. And I said, "You really don't know?" And she said, "Well, I'm from the United Kingdom, and I hear all this talk about the Stanley Cup." So she really didn't know. And they bring the cup and all the other trophies to the hotel when the series starts, and as the elevator doors open, there was the Stanley Cup on display. And it was a funny story, because I thought that's the one question I'll never get asked in Montreal.
No, not at all. No, and that looked like it was going to be a great series, but Montreal came back and won the last 4 in a row to take the Kings out.
Well, the Kings won the first game in Montreal and had a lead in Game 2, and it's something happened in that game that Kings fans have never forgotten, and I recount that in the book, that with 1:45 to go and the Kings winning, Montreal challenged Marty McSorley's stick. It was an illegal stick. They got a power play, scored the tying goal, And talk about change in momentum. From that moment on, the rest of the series, which went 5 games, the Kings never had a lead in a game the rest of the way, and yet here they were on the verge of coming home to Los Angeles up 2-0. So it really turned it around, and Montreal won 3 straight overtime games and then won Game 5 back in Montreal to win the Cup. So, who knows? Kings might not have won any more games, but it would have been nice to come home up 2-0.
Would have been something to see. And kind of a local side note here, and somebody that used to coach the Kings, Larry Robinson. Bob, I'm not sure if you were aware, he lives down here, and we had a chance to do, I don't know, I think I told you maybe off the air, polo on the radio, and he's actually one of the top polo players down here in Sarasota. So I didn't realize that. Yeah.
Yeah, he played polo, I think, even when he was playing in Montreal. In fact, I think broke his leg one time, which Montreal wasn't too happy about.
Right.
But a great guy, and, he played with us, and he was for a couple of years, but he had all those great years in Montreal. He's a Hall of Famer, and just a wonderful guy, he and his wife and family, and I know they live down there in Florida. But we always have a lot of laughs when we get together with Larry.
Well, I guess I'm the premier polo announcer on radio, Bob, in Sarasota. I've done 4 matches, so.
Well, I knew a guy who did the Iditarod, and I said, "What did you do? The paw by paw?"
That's right. But it's a lot of fun, and this book is a lot of fun too. And again, if you're a hockey fan, I know you're going to love it. But even if you're not, you're going to enjoy some of the really funny stories in the book. And one we were thinking about telling today. We'll let you read it in the book. It is really you're going to laugh out loud like I did. And it's called Tales from the Los Angeles Kings. And I mentioned the website Sports Publishing LLC, but I guess all the websites have it, right, Bob?
Yeah, I think so, or bookstores can order it for you, and a lot of people out here have been buying it for some Christmas gifts, and in fact, a couple of weeks ago, it was number 9 on the LA Times bestseller list, so that's
great.
really pleased me, because it's my first attempt at writing anything like that, and so I've had fun with it. I had fun researching it, and have had that reaction from people like you said. They said I just laughed out loud at some of those stories.
And it's hard to make people laugh out loud when you're reading, and you've done it, so it's great. Well, Bob Miller, it's a real pleasure to be able to catch up with you. I know this book was kind of on hold for a while with the lockout, and I'm glad we finally were able to talk to you.
Well, Doug, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you and to talk to all the hockey fans down there in Florida.
And we look forward to seeing you. I think you come in February when you play the Lightning, so we'll see you up in the press box. Look forward to that.
Great. So will I. Thank you.
Bob Miller joining us. We'll take a break. Be right back.